Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." If you've ever felt someone pull away the moment you began to truly care, this isn't just coincidence, it's a mirror. Today I invite you to look deeper, to see not rejection but revelation, and to discover the hidden patterns that shape your relationships and your worth. Carl Jung often reminded us that human behavior is not dictated solely by the conscious mind, but is deeply shaped by hidden forces in the unconscious. When we speak of why they lose interest when you start caring, we are looking at a dynamic that on the surface seems puzzling or even hurtful, yet beneath that surface lies an intricate psychological process. Many assume that a person's withdrawal in response to genuine care means that they no longer feel the same way. But Jung's perspective reveals a different truth. The withdrawal often has little to do with the present moment and everything to do with the patterns and wounds that live deep within the psyche. From a Jungian point of view, every person carries within them a personal unconscious shaped by individual experiences and a collective unconscious that holds universal patterns or archetypes. These archetypes influence how we relate to love, trust, and vulnerability. When you start to care more, when your actions demonstrate consistency, empathy, and genuine emotional investment, you are not just engaging with the person's conscious self, you are also touching these deeper layers, often awakening memories and associations that they may not even be aware of. Jung taught that the unconscious will protect itself from what it perceives as a threat to its stability. For some, intimacy is that threat. Caring gestures, steady presence, and emotional closeness may unconsciously signal danger because in their earlier experiences, such closeness may have led to pain, loss, or rejection. The mind, seeking to protect itself, responds with withdrawal. It is not a calculated decision, but an instinctive retreat, a defense mechanism rooted in old narratives about love. This is why, in many cases, the loss of interest is not a sudden change of heart but a resurfacing of unresolved patterns. Imagine a person who, as a child, learned that love came with conditions or that care was often followed by abandonment. When they encounter real, steady affection in adulthood, it does not simply feel safe, it also triggers the memory of what came after. To their unconscious, caring is linked to potential loss. The easiest way to avoid that risk is to distance themselves before it happens again. Jung might say that this reaction is the result of a cluster of emotionally charged memories and beliefs that operate autonomously within the psyche. A love complex of this nature can be activated when someone starts to care deeply for them. The conscious mind might even want to stay, but the complex sends signals of discomfort, mistrust, or even boredom, pushing them away from the relationship. This is not a flaw in your worth or your love, it is a reflection of their inner architecture, one that you cannot control. Another important layer in Jung's understanding is the role of projection. When you begin to care more, the other person might unconsciously project onto you an image from their past, perhaps a parent, a former partner, or another figure who once occupied the role of caretaker. If that earlier relationship ended in disappointment or pain, your care might become intertwined with that old image in their mind. Without realizing it, they respond to you not as you are, but as the symbolic figure you represent to them. This is why withdrawal can feel sudden and illogical. They are not reacting only to the present relationship, but to an entire history of associations stored in their unconscious. In some cases, caring changes the perceived dynamic of the relationship, which can stir hidden fears. In the early stages of attraction, there is often an element of mystery or distance that keeps both parties engaged in a kind of dance. When one person steps forward with clear and consistent affection, the other may feel that the unspoken space has closed too quickly. For someone with unresolved fears of dependency, this can feel suffocating, not because the care is excessive, but because their internal boundaries are fragile. Jung would view this as the tension between the desire for intimacy and the fear of losing the self within it, a tension that is archetypal and deeply human. The irony, of course, is that the very thing that most people claim to want, genuine care, is the thing that can unsettle them the most when it arrives. This is why Jung stressed the importance of consciousness. Becoming aware of these inner dynamics gives us the power to choose differently, rather than being driven by instinctive withdrawal. But when a person has not yet brought these fears into the light, they are likely to act on them without understanding why. For the one offering care, this can be a deeply confusing and painful experience. It is easy to take the withdrawal personally, to interpret it as a rejection of who you are or the love you have given. But Jung's approach invites a different perspective, to see it not as a verdict on your worth, but as an encounter with the other person's unfinished inner work. Just as we carry our own complexes, fears and projections, so do they. Their loss of interest is less about you and more about their inability, in this moment, to hold the intimacy you have offered. In this way, the experience becomes not only a challenge but also a mirror. It asks you to examine your own patterns, why you were drawn to this person, what you hoped your care would bring, and how you respond when someone pulls away. Jung would remind us that every relationship is a meeting of two unconscious worlds, and that both people have the opportunity to grow if they are willing to look inward. Ultimately, why they lose interest when you start caring is a question of readiness. Readiness to meet intimacy without retreating into old fears, readiness to stay present when vulnerability stirs discomfort. For some, that readiness has not yet come. And while you cannot accelerate another's journey toward it, you can use the experience to deepen your own understanding of love, attachment, and the unconscious patterns that shape them. In doing so, you honor not only the truth of the relationship, but also your own path toward a more conscious, grounded way of loving. Carl Jung often spoke of intimacy as a profound meeting place, not just between two people, but between the conscious and unconscious aspects of each person's psyche. When we consider why people distance themselves when you care, it is important to understand that in many cases, this distancing is not deliberate rejection. Instead, it can be a deeply ingrained reaction tied to what Jung would call attachment patterns and the archetypal fears that live in the collective unconscious. In simple terms, when care enters the equation, it sometimes activates a hidden part of the psyche that feels threatened rather than comforted. To the rational mind, this makes little sense. Care, after all, is supposed to bring people closer together. But Jung's work reminds us that the human psyche does not always operate on logic. It operates on experience, both remembered and forgotten, and on symbolic meaning. For some, genuine care awakens old wounds tied to early relationships, often those with caregivers. If in childhood, closeness was inconsistent, controlling, or followed by pain, the adult self may unconsciously link care with danger. When a new partner or friend begins to offer steady affection, it can unconsciously replay those early experiences, causing the person to retreat. Attachment styles, a concept that resonates with Jung's ideas, help explain part of this. Those with avoidant attachment often learn to protect themselves from emotional pain by keeping a safe distance. Intimacy feels like a potential loss of freedom, an exposure of the self that leaves them vulnerable. When you begin to care more, they may interpret it, not consciously, but on a deeper emotional level, as a threat to their autonomy. Jung might say that this is the anima or animus responding defensively, retreating from the unfamiliar terrain of trust and emotional openness. This reaction is not simply personal, it also has archetypal roots. In the collective unconscious, there are patterns that associate vulnerability with survival risks. Historically, and in myth, letting one's guard down could mean betrayal, loss, or harm. These symbolic patterns live on in the modern psyche, influencing behavior in ways that seem irrational from the outside. The person pulling away may not understand why they feel uneasy, they only know that the comfort of being cared for somehow stirs anxiety. From Jung's perspective, projection also plays a significant role. When you show consistent care, you may become a symbolic figure in their inner world, perhaps representing a nurturing parent, a past lover, or an ideal they hold about love. If that inner figure is tied to past pain or disappointment, your care may unconsciously trigger defenses meant for someone else. They are not necessarily reacting to you as you are, but to the image you have awakened in their psyche. This is why the distancing can feel sudden and out of proportion to the reality of the relationship. Push-pull relationship psychology offers another layer of understanding. When someone is attracted to you, they may initially feel safe because there is emotional space between you. Your care, while well-intentioned, begins to close that space. If their inner boundaries are fragile, they may experience this as pressure, even if you are not demanding anything. Jung would say this is the tension between the desire for union and the fear of dissolution of the self, a fundamental human paradox. The closer we get to another, the more we risk losing the edges of our individuality, and for some that risk feels intolerable. It is also important to remember that distancing can be a way of controlling emotional pacing. If care arrives faster than they are ready to receive it, they may instinctively slow the connection by creating space. Jung understood relationships as processes of individuation for both partners, each person learning to balance connection with selfhood. If one moves faster toward intimacy, the other may instinctively pull back to maintain equilibrium, even if it means causing temporary distance. Fear of intimacy and emotional closeness is not always about a lack of desire for love. Often it is about an unpreparedness to manage the emotional exposure that love requires. When you care, you invite the other person to be seen, not just in their strengths, but in their vulnerabilities, flaws, and unhealed wounds. For some, this level of visibility feels overwhelming. Jung believed that when the unconscious feels threatened, it mobilizes protective strategies, sometimes in the form of physical or emotional withdrawal. For the one offering care, this dynamic can be confusing and painful. It is natural to interpret distancing as a statement about your worth or your actions. But through a Jungian lens, it is often more accurate to see it as a statement about the other person's relationship with their own inner world. They may not yet have the internal stability to hold intimacy without feeling invaded. They may need to strengthen their own boundaries and trust before they can meet you at the depth you are offering. Jung's work invites both compassion and boundaries in such situations. Compassion, because the withdrawal is usually rooted in deep-seated patterns that the person did not choose and may not fully understand. Boundaries, because while you cannot fix another's inner architecture, you can protect your own emotional well-being as you navigate the connection. The experience of someone pulling away can serve as a mirror, prompting you to reflect on your own patterns. Do you overextend your care in hopes of being chosen? Do you equate closeness with safety, while they equate it with risk? Why people distance themselves when you care is, at its core, about readiness to face the vulnerability that intimacy demands. In many cases, the person withdrawing is not rejecting you, but protecting themselves from feelings they have not yet learned to manage. Jung would remind us that such moments are opportunities for growth, for both individuals to become more conscious of the forces shaping their connections. The more we can see these patterns clearly, the more we can choose responses rooted in awareness rather than reaction, and the more space we create for authentic, lasting intimacy to emerge. Carl Jung often described relationships as mirrors in which we encounter not only the other person, but also the parts of ourselves we have yet to acknowledge. In the psychology of losing interest in relationships, this mirror effect becomes particularly evident. When someone begins to pull away just as you start to care more, it is tempting to focus only on their actions. Yet Jung's perspective invites us to look deeper into the unconscious patterns, shadow elements, and archetypal forces that are quietly influencing both people in the dynamic. It is here, in the depths of the psyche, that the true story unfolds. In Jungian psychology, the shadow represents the aspects of ourselves that we have repressed or denied, qualities we do not want to see in ourselves, yet often project onto others. In the context of attraction and loss of interest, the shadow can play a decisive role. Imagine someone who consciously longs for closeness but unconsciously fears it. At the start of a relationship, the excitement of pursuit may feel safe because the emotional stakes are lower, but when your care becomes consistent and real intimacy approaches, their shadow, the part that fears exposure or vulnerability, stirs and begins to resist. This resistance can manifest as emotional withdrawal, loss of attraction, or even sudden disinterest. Jung would say that the loss of interest is often less about the specific person offering care and more about the inner landscape of the one withdrawing. In the psychology of attraction, much of what we feel drawn to in another person is tied to projections, images and qualities from our own unconscious that we see in the other. Early in a connection, these projections are often idealized. You may seem to them like the perfect partner, embodying the traits they consciously desire. But as the relationship deepens and reality replaces projection, the other person may encounter parts of you, or parts of themselves reflected through you, that do not match the fantasy. When this mismatch occurs, the attraction may fade, not because the connection is less valuable, but because the unconscious image has shifted. For some, consistent care challenges their internal narrative about love and self-worth. If someone believes, often unconsciously, that they are not worthy of stable affection, your care can trigger discomfort rather than gratitude. They may unconsciously sabotage the connection to protect themselves from the pain they anticipate. Jung understood this as a defense rooted in complexes, emotionally charged patterns formed by past experiences, often in early life. A love complex tied to rejection or abandonment can cause a person to retreat from healthy connection simply because it does not fit the emotional template they know. The psychology of losing attraction is also tied to the balance of tension in relationships. Jung noted that the psyche thrives on a dynamic interplay of opposites, closeness and distance, familiarity and mystery, comfort and challenge. In the early stages of romance, mystery often fuels attraction. When one person begins to care deeply and shows it openly, the mystery diminishes and the dynamic shifts. For someone who equates attraction with novelty or uncertainty, this shift can feel like a loss of spark. Without awareness, they may interpret this natural evolution as a sign that the connection is no longer exciting, rather than recognizing it as an opportunity to deepen intimacy in a different way. In some cases, emotional unavailability is at the root of losing interest. Jung might describe this as a lack of integration between the conscious self and the unconscious, leaving the person unable to hold the emotional weight of genuine intimacy. They may find the lightness of casual connection enjoyable, but become unsettled when the relationship asks for depth. Your care, rather than being received as a gift, may be experienced as a demand they are not prepared to meet. This is not about fault, but about readiness. Readiness to face one's own vulnerabilities, and to engage with the other as a whole person, rather than an idealized image. Jung's concept of individuation, the process of becoming a fully integrated self, sheds light on why these moments can be so pivotal. When someone pulls away, it forces both individuals to confront the unconscious material the relationship has brought to the surface. For the one withdrawing, this might mean recognizing their fear of commitment or their avoidance of emotional closeness. For the one offering care, it might mean facing patterns of overgiving, attachment to emotionally unavailable partners, or fears of abandonment. In this way, what feels like an ending or rejection can also be an invitation to growth. Push-pull dynamics in relationships often emerge from this interplay of unconscious fears and desires. One person moves closer, the other retreats, the distance reignites attraction, and the cycle repeats. Without awareness, this can become exhausting and destructive. Jung would suggest that breaking the cycle requires both individuals to become conscious of their projections and shadows, to see the other not as an archetypal figure, but as a real, complex human being. This shift from fantasy to reality is not easy, but it is essential for sustaining genuine connection. The psychology of losing interest in relationships, then, is not simply about fading feelings. It is about the way unconscious patterns, shadow elements, and projections shape attraction and intimacy. When care is met with distance, it is often a sign that the relationship has reached a threshold, a point where deeper truths about love, fear, and self-worth are emerging. Jung would remind us that crossing such thresholds requires courage, for both people must face parts of themselves they may prefer to keep hidden. If we can approach these moments with awareness rather than reaction, they become opportunities for transformation. The loss of interest, rather than being the end of the story, can mark the beginning of a more conscious and authentic way of relating, one in which attraction is sustained not by illusion, but by the willingness to see and be seen in the fullness of who we are. Carl Jung believed that every relationship is a living exchange between two inner worlds, each person bringing their conscious self and their unconscious patterns into the connection. When someone pulls away the moment you start to care, it can be tempting to label it as rejection or a flaw in yourself. But Jung's way of seeing teaches us something very different. These moments act as mirrors, reflecting not just the other person's inner world, but also your own. They are not only about what the other person is doing, they are invitations to examine what is happening within you. In Jungian psychology, the unconscious seeks expression through our relationships. The people we attract, the moments that hurt us, and the patterns that keep repeating, are rarely accidents. Instead, they are opportunities for us to meet the parts of ourselves that we have ignored, repressed, or misunderstood. If you find yourself repeatedly in situations where someone loses interest when you show care, the pattern itself becomes the mirror. It invites the question, why am I drawn to people who cannot receive what I freely give? This does not mean you are to blame for another person's withdrawal. Jung would never frame it as fault. Rather, he would see it as a chance for consciousness, to bring into awareness what is often operating in the shadows. Perhaps you are unconsciously drawn to those who confirm an old belief, such as "I am not enough" or "love always leaves." In that case, the withdrawal of the other person is not just their action, it is also the activation of your own unhealed wound. The mirror they hold up shows you where your story about love still needs rewriting. The moment they pull away is also a moment when your own shadow may emerge. In Jung's terms, the shadow is the collection of traits, emotions and impulses we have disowned in ourselves. When faced with distance, you might feel anger, fear, or desperation, feelings you were taught to hide or suppress. Seeing these reactions not as signs of weakness, but as messages from your inner world can transform the experience. Your shadow, in this context, is not your enemy. It is the part of you that wants to be acknowledged, understood, and integrated. For the other person, your care might be the catalyst that awakens their own shadow. They might suddenly feel exposed in ways they are not ready for. Care can act like a light that reaches into corners they have kept hidden, revealing their fears of intimacy, loss of control, or dependency. In this way, their retreat says more about the state of their inner world than about your value. Jung often said that what is unconscious in one person will be lived out in the relationship, so their pulling away may simply be the manifestation of fears they have yet to face. The beauty of Jung's mirror metaphor is that it applies in both directions. Just as their behavior reflects your patterns, your care reflects theirs. You might embody for them the kind of love they long for, but do not trust. Your consistency may remind them of something they once had and lost, or something they feared they could never keep. The very act of caring can stir both hope and dread in the same breath. Hope for the connection they want, dread of the vulnerability it requires. Jung would encourage you to hold these realizations without judgment. The purpose of seeing the mirror is not to assign blame, but to understand the forces at work. Relationships are often the stage on which the unconscious plays out its dramas, and each interaction gives us the chance to rewrite the script. If you can see their withdrawal not as an erasure of your worth, but as a reflection of their readiness, you free yourself from taking on responsibility for what is not yours to carry. At the same time, these moments ask you to be honest about your own readiness. It is easy to say we want love, but love requires not only the courage to give, but also the resilience to stay open when the other person falters. Jung would see this as part of individuation, the process of becoming whole. Individuation means owning your patterns, integrating your shadow, and learning to stand in your truth regardless of another's reaction. In this light, someone pulling away is not just a relational setback, it is an initiation into deeper self-awareness. Sometimes the mirror they hold up shows you that you are overextending yourself, giving more than is healthy in hopes of securing connection. This is a valuable revelation because it allows you to adjust, to care from a place of grounded self-respect rather than need. Other times, the mirror shows you that you are ready for a kind of intimacy they cannot yet meet. A truth that, while painful, can free you to seek relationships that align with your emotional capacity. The reflective nature of relationships also means that your response to their withdrawal is a choice point. Do you collapse into self-doubt, or do you step back and observe the deeper dynamics at play? Jung believed that every conscious choice to act from self-awareness, rather than unconscious reaction, strengthens the self, the integrated whole of your being. In moments like these, choosing to stay curious about what is being reflected back to you turns pain into insight. Ultimately, the idea that these moments act as mirrors reframes the entire experience.
You stop seeing them as evidence that you are unlovable and start seeing them as valuable data about your inner landscape and the patterns you are ready to outgrow. For Jung, the goal of all relationships was not simply to make us happy but to make us whole. And sometimes, it is the discomfort of another's distance that shows us exactly where we need to grow. By accepting the mirror they hold up, even when the reflection is hard to face, you step into a more conscious, empowered way of loving, one that honors both yourself and the truth of the other person's journey. Carl Jung taught that every relationship is more than a meeting of two people. It is a meeting of two inner worlds, each carrying its history, fears, and hidden truths. When someone loses interest, the moment you begin to care, it is rarely a reflection of your worth. More often, it is the surfacing of unconscious patterns, old wounds, and archetypal fears that neither of you may yet fully understand. These moments, though painful, can act as mirrors, revealing not only the other person's readiness for intimacy, but also your own patterns, beliefs, and emotional boundaries. If approached with awareness, they become opportunities for growth rather than wounds to carry. Jung's wisdom reminds us that love is not just about finding the right person, but about becoming conscious enough to meet another without losing ourselves, and strong enough to walk away when the connection cannot yet meet the depth we offer.